Welcome, everybody. We're just going to take a few minutes and let people sign in. We're listening to the amazing artist, Taina Asili and La Banda Rebelde, and this is her song, Plant the Seed. We'll just take a few minutes to let people join. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to take another minute and let people sign in. Beautiful to see you panelists here this morning. Thank you for joining. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining on this beautiful sunny day. Welcome to this Friday morning conversation for the Food Systems Symposium at Yale. This panel today is about community-based initiatives for a resilient food system in New Haven. And we have a wonderful lineup of fellow New Haven organizers, activists, food system workers, and really grateful to be with you this morning. So I wanted to just start first by just sharing a couple of values of how we're holding this conversation, at least how I am facilitator of holding this conversation this morning. First of all, from a place of gratitude for these beautiful humans who have joined today and are giving their time, who give incredible time to the work they do in our New Haven community and beyond, and who are making time to share about it this morning. So immense gratitude. I also want to name that I think for myself, and I think for the other people on this panel who I know personally in some ways, putting this work in the historical context of the land that we live on, the way that power has been used on this land, the genocide that's happened on this land, and also the liberation that has happened on this land and in the various communities, and acknowledging also the ancestry that each of us bring and the different relationship that each of us bring to this work and to working in this place. So some of us have lived in the city just for a few years. Some of us were born here. Some of us have been here for a few generations and have various relationships to this place and to the people and to this land. And I think I just want to hold, as each of us bring the values that we bring to how we work in community, also just making sure that we remember the historical context of that work as well. And this conversation today, a lot is about how each of us, and I'll be facilitating, so more thinking about how each of you work in community and support work that is driven and led by the community, and the ways that you practice that and why you do that work that way and what's important about that. And the pieces of that have to do with redistributing power and resources so that we can support resiliency. And so when we think about the historical context of the way that power has been taken away, land, rights, and other things have been taken away, today we're having a conversation about how different people in our New Haven community are looking at how they can redistribute power and resources and support resiliency from within communities. And so sometimes we do that well, sometimes we struggle to do that, but that's what we're going to be in conversation about today to learn about, and hope that people who are listening can think about how can we learn from this and take those practices into any space that we're working in. So thank you for being here this morning. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction of each of these beautiful humans, and then invite them to tell us a little bit about their work in more detail. So with the beautiful green background is my friend Dishuan Harris, who is joining us. He is from New Haven, but in the moment is actually in Tanzania, studying some permaculture wisdom from the motherland, so he can bring it back here and enrich our local community. And Dishuan is an urban farmer and educator with his own business, Root Life, as well as being an urban agriculture educator and food educator at ConnCat in Science Park, and also a community garden manager where he partners with Gather New Haven, the land trust organization, on some community gardens. So Dishuan, welcome. Then we also have Kimberly Acosta, who is our food policy analyst with the City of New Haven Food System Policy Division. So Kimberly works for the City of New Haven and is going to tell us about her work there. She's also worked for a number of other organizations doing food and land-based work in New Haven. Anthony Barroso, who is a member and organizer with the Sumiya Collective Mutual Aid and Food Garage. Anthony, thanks for being here. And Sumiya Khan, who is the program manager with CitySeed and oversees Sanctuary Kitchen, as well as the Food Business Accelerator. Thank you all so much for being here. You can unmute and say good morning so people can hear your voices for 1 sec.
Thanks, Indeed. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Tagan. And I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Excited to be here as well.
Hey everyone, thanks. Excited to be here and have this discussion.
Great. So we're going to start with Dishuan. Dishuan, could you just for 2 or 3 minutes give us an idea of, or give people who are listening some overview of what the work is that you do in New Haven?
Awesome, indeed. Thank you, Tagan. So hello, everybody. Again, my name is Dishuan Harris, also known as Farmer D in New Haven. And I've done a lot of work in New Haven over the past decade. I've been urban farming actually for about a decade in New Haven. I'm born and raised in New Haven, and so was my mother and father. And I decided to become a farmer when I graduated from college and wanted to make a change in my community. And I realized that food sovereignty is a very, very political thing, and it's very powerful. And so I just hopped into the world of learning how to grow food. And I started actually at Yale, at the Botanical Gardens and the Sustainable Food Project, as far as interning and getting my hands in there. And so go from there. I actually ended up getting an internship officially at Common Ground High School in New Haven. And from there, I worked for about 3 to 4 years as an environmental educator, as a farm hand, and as a farm educator. So I did all 3 of those roles in very different capacities, from homeschool to after school to in school, and other things in between, summer camps. And so I've been building my skill set up from there. When I felt like I was ready from Common Ground, I ended up starting my own company called Root Life LLC. And Root Life does a lot of agricultural food justice work, which includes, but is not limited to, youth programming for schools, for nonprofits, for just community organizations. I do community garden management. I've done the Star Street Community Garden in the New Homeville area. I'm currently the garden manager at the Webb Community Garden, the Armory Community Garden, which is a Raleigh Edgewood Beaver Hills management team ran through Gather New Haven. And we also tested out the Walcott Garden last year on Walcott Street in Fairhaven. Also do an organization that I co-founded Root Life was able to install over 100 garden beds for residents in New Haven. So that's been an aspect of what we do. And yes, it's a lot. Let me know, tell you if I'm going over that 3-minute mark too. You get lost when you start talking about yourself. But
I think
so
that's
now,
great for now. We'll
okay,
go ahead,
cool.
say a little
Okay.
more now.
No, that's good indeed. Now I'm in Tanzania, as Tagan said, and I'm learning more permaculture to bring that back to train people back home how to actually use these techniques in the urban area that we're in, because I've grown indoors and outdoors, to utilize the spaces that we have to make a larger impact on the agriculture scene. So yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dishuan. All right, and Kimberly, I'm going to pass it to you, and I know you have some slides to share, so excited to hear about how you want to share about the work that the City of New Haven Food System Policy Division is doing.
Thanks, Tagan. And just to let everyone know, I'm going to turn my video off to make sure, or lessen the chance of my internet going out and me not being able to finish the presentation. Sorry, okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Acosta. I'm the food policy analyst for the City of New Haven's Food System Policy Division. And today I'm excited to be here to talk about how our division works with the New Haven community to create an equitable and resilient food system. First, I'd like to start with a brief history of the Food System Policy Division. We were established in mid-2016 as a new division within Health and Human Services, thanks to funding from the Kendall Foundation. In late 2018, Latha Swami was hired as the director, and the position was moved under the city's general funds. I'd like to highlight that the director is the only city-funded position within our division. In January 2020, I started working with the division part-time as the food system administrator, thanks to funding from the Kendall Foundation. In mid-2020, we secured our first major grants, both from the USDA's newly established Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. We received $500,000 from the Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production Competitive Grants Program to develop over the next 3 years New Haven's first Urban Agriculture Master Plan. And we also received $90,000 from the Community Composting for Waste Reduction Cooperative Agreement Program. In November 2020, I transitioned into my current role as the food policy analyst, where I'm responsible for managing the Urban Agriculture Master Plan process and the grant which funds my position. In addition, Lexi Basil was hired as the food system administrator, which is now funded by the CARES Act. And this is just, I just want to show a brief slide of our team, Latha, Lexi, and I. So what guides our work is our mission to support and help manifest community-led efforts that envision and create an environmentally sustainable and socially just food system. We operate through a food justice framework and across 3 thematic priorities: health equity, socioeconomic justice, and environmental justice. It's important to emphasize that all of our work is rooted in anti-racism and equity. In addition to supporting programs that provide critical social safety nets, for example, food pantries, we also strongly focus on addressing root causes and striving for systemic change, for example, upstream solutions such as economic security and secure land access. We accomplish our work through a coalition-based approach involving interdepartmental and institutional partnerships and tight connections to grassroots, regional, national, and international knowledge sharing and action networks. And here you can see a couple of our partners on each of those levels. The project I will focus on for today's panel discussion is our inclusive community-led process to create over the next 3 years New Haven's first Urban Agriculture Master Plan. This project is the perfect example of when all of our division's priorities, environmental justice, health equity, and socioeconomic justice, intersect and is our most community-directed project. The plan will be an actionable blueprint for urban agriculture development that will ultimately increase access to land and opportunities in order to support the production and sale of locally grown foods, build and strengthen community, improve public health and well-being, and provide economic opportunity, particularly in areas that have vacant or underutilized land and low access to food. The guiding values of the project are equity, community involvement and ownership, and anti-gentrification and displacement. Anti-gentrification and displacement is important to us because urban agriculture development has unfortunately been correlated with gentrification and displacement in several major cities, and we want to prevent that from happening in New Haven. There are 3 thematic pathways for the Urban Agriculture Master Plan. One is creating an equitable and enabling policy environment for urban agriculture. This will focus on reducing policy and zoning barriers to urban agriculture based on best practices and needs identified by the community. The socioeconomic viability pathway will focus on analyzing New Haven's capacity to support urban agriculture businesses and ensuring that demand could meet supply and that economic benefits are equitably distributed across neighborhoods. This capacity will be determined through feedback from a newly established Small Businesses for Urban Ag working group and the community. And for this pathway, we will especially focus on working with hyperlocal businesses such as bodegas and corner stores. The third pathway is mobilizing resources for workforce development and training, which will focus on mapping current local, state, regional, and/or national pathways to education, jobs, and resources for new farmers, identify barriers to implementation specific to New Haven, and in alignment with community needs, identifying transferable programming. Our goals are to ultimately eliminate longstanding regulatory resource and information barriers to engaging in urban agriculture and provide a cohesive strategy to create transparent, easy to navigate city processes, update zoning regulations and land use policies, improve access to knowledge and financial resources for urban agricultural initiatives, and better connect with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. One of the most exciting components of this project is the creation of a community advisory board, which will co-lead the entire process. It will consist of up to 60 members who will be paid $25 an hour and commit up to 34 hours of their time each year. It will be split into 4 groups with different areas of expertise, specifically neighborhood experts who have on-the-ground knowledge of their neighborhood and its residents, community health experts who are familiar with the health needs and challenges of their communities, urban farming experts who are individuals familiar with urban agricultural activities and its related businesses in New Haven. And for this, we want to be very explicit that it's for also backyard and community gardeners, and youth, so individuals who are 14 to 22 years old who are interested or involved in urban agricultural activities. I look forward to sharing a bit more about the Urban Agriculture Master Plan and the values and thought process that went into this during the panel discussion. But if you'd like to learn more about our work and how to plug in, please visit our website and social media. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Kimberly. That was great. I know it's a lot to take in all at once, but I thought it was important that people sort of get a sense of what the work is that each of you do before we jump into some of the questions. I'm going to pass it. Actually, before I pass it over to Anthony, I want to say we're going to use the Q&A feature today for if people who are listening have questions. So you can feel free to drop questions in there throughout our conversation, and we're going to hold most of them to the end. But if you hear something and you want to know more, feel free to type that in while the conversation is happening. Anthony, I'm going to pass it over to you. Can you share about Sumiya Collective, mutual aid and food garage work and beyond?
Thank you, Tagan. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited. My name is Anthony Barroso. I'm originally from Ecuador and I grew up in New Haven since the age of 8. I'm undocumented and unafraid. I'm also a member and organizer of El Colectivo Sumiya, also known as the Sumiya Collective. We are a grassroots collective formed in the fall of 2019, and we are fighting side by side with our immigrant community and working class families. We also host cultural events in our community. Our group is composed of workers, community organizers, educators, healthcare workers, parents, artists, and many more. And we are coming together to collectively build a better world for our future generations. I joined the collective through an invitation from Chris Mendoza, an awesome educator at Wilbur Cross High School who supported an UndocuPower program that was in partnership with Connecticut Students for a Dream. We were organizing with youth and undocumented youth specifically against like the violence of ICE and many of the injustices that immigrant communities face in our societies, but specifically we ran local campaigns. But once the pandemic hit, we saw all of our work just come to a halt, and we were just bracing for what was coming next. the food garage, and now known as La Cajita project, started as a solidarity project in New Haven. It was initiated by Luis Luna and Ariana Shapiro from the collective. We were connected to many immigrant families in New Haven, and many of those families were being left behind by the government. And often they're the most impoverished and marginalized. Many of them were domestic workers, restaurant workers, maintenance, and they were losing their jobs and facing an increased amount of food insecurity and not having any support at all. So we at first just started kind of as like, okay, like we know people are struggling, and then we were connected to some folks who were, you know, like, we have this food, do you know anyone that needs it? And then that's kind of how it started at a small garage. And through the span of 6 months, which was all composed of volunteers and everything, we grew so drastically, and we had over 500 volunteers who made it happen, and not only composed of allies, but also folks who were receiving boxes. And it really turned into a project where we were developing leadership. Folks were doing what they could, whether it be putting together boxes, calling other families, delivering food, or doing whatever they could to stand in solidarity with other community members. And it was something very beautiful to witness and to also be a part of. And Tagan was also a part of you know, helping us distribute all this food to about 600 to 700 families received weekly deliveries of food, with additional cash assistance that was raised from the New Haven Mutual Aid fundraiser that was also a part of the collective initiative. And every week we delivered about 150 boxes, which added about to like 600 boxes a month. And the folks who were calling families to see, you know, like if they still needed food or like what kind of supplies that they needed, they made about like 780 calls a month. And in this way, we also were able to develop the leadership and skills of many folks who often, you know, never encountered Zoom, weren't really familiar with like Google Docs, Google spreadsheets. And in many ways, now a lot of the folks who at first were just receiving boxes are now leading the project. They are taking ownership, they're setting agendas, they're being a part of the envisioning of the future of the project. We stopped doing the food distribution in November of 2020. We stopped for various reasons. We saw that it was becoming not sustainable. And we were also, we wanted to focus our energy on building something that is more long-lasting and can provide financial security through employment, access to fresh nutritional foods, while also thinking about how do we stop depending on large corporations, large institutions, while also holding large institutions in our community accountable. So that's the work that we've been engaging in recently, and we're excited to see where the future takes us.
Thank you, Anthony. That was such a great overview, and I'm excited to hear more, for you to share more. Sumiya, can we pass it over to you to share about Sanctuary Kitchen and the Food Business Accelerator programs? And I think you have some slides to share as well. Thank you. You're muted, Sumiya. It's okay. It happens to everybody.
Sorry, trying to like navigate all the different things. So I was saying, my name is Sumiya, and I'm the Kitchen Programs Manager at CitySeed. A lot of you are familiar with CitySeed. It's been around since 2004, working with the community to grow an equitable local food system that promotes economic development and community development and sustainable agriculture. And initially that started off with running the New Haven farmers markets. And since then, I'm going to be sharing about two newer programs that are more relevant, not more relevant, but pertinent to tonight's, this morning's discussion. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
You're doing great. Don't worry. It's a lot to juggle.
So the first program is what we call CitySeed Incubates. And so the goal of this program is to create economic opportunity for all, increasing leadership of people of color, immigrant food entrepreneurs, and strengthening our local food system by connecting rising entrepreneurs and farmers. So CitySeed Incubates works with early stage entrepreneurs in New Haven annually, hundreds, and we focus on populations who've been marginalized or face barriers to accessing resources. So new refugees and immigrants, women, people of color, and low income populations. Oops, my picture's coming up here. So part of CitySeed Incubates is our Food Business Accelerator, which is a partnership between CitySeed and Collab. It's a community-led accelerator for New Haven early stage entrepreneurs with the aim to remove barriers through training, network building, and access to resources. So this is an annual 10 to 12-week program, really walking our early stage entrepreneurs through all the steps that they need to do to start their food business. In addition to the Food Business Accelerator, we have a commercial kitchen that is available at for small food businesses to use. That's definitely in a challenge in New Haven to find accessible commercial kitchen spaces. And we're growing our support services for entrepreneurs through, walking them throughout their process, depending on where they're at. We actually just hired a new food entrepreneurship manager to really grow this aspect of CitySeed. My computer is bugging out here. Okay, so the second program that I want to highlight is Sanctuary Kitchen. And Sanctuary Kitchen partners with immigrant and refugees to build economic opportunity and authentic connections in the community using food as a tool. So we do that through a couple different ways with the goal of enhancing the culinary skills of refugees and immigrants in a supportive environment that really honors their story, their culture traditions, while building community and understanding. And in the process, we also offer professional development and really supporting ways to generate economic success. So we facilitate immigrant-led culinary events such as cooking classes, dinners, and other cultural events with partners in the community. We also run a social enterprise featuring authentic multicultural dishes and food products while providing regular employment with a livable wage and professional development for the chefs who participate. Some of the training that we focus on is Culinary Esl, which is a new program that we've developed. It's actually unique. There's hardly any ESL that focuses on culinary in the country. And then, all of the chefs that we work with are already really experienced home cooks. So rather than focusing on knife skills, we really focus on taking those skills that they already have and putting them in a professional environment. And allowing, and supporting them in other areas like computer literacy, professionalism, scaling recipes for, a professional environment, and so forth. The area that we are really working on is job readiness. So job search and applications, computer literacy, and placement. So this means working with partners in the community, food businesses in the New Haven area, and developing relationships so that when the chefs are finished with our program, they can be placed in various capacities. This is going to involve working with employers in creating environments that support refugees and immigrants, because a lot of them right now do not. And lastly, we really want the chefs that we work with to be able to share their story and share their culture and their history. And we do that through, of course, their food, but also we support them with public speaking and storytelling training. So you can learn more about Sanctuary Kitchen and CitySeed Incubates on our website. And that's my slide. We'll go, there we go. Sanctuarykitchen.org and cityseed.org. You can learn about our kitchens and our food business accelerator. And you can also connect with us on social media. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sumiya. It's really helpful to start our conversation with sort of an overview of what the work each of you is connected to, so that people can kind of understand what else you have to say in that context. Each of you have sort of already touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig in a little more onto how you do community-directed work and why that is so important. So if as you explain some of this, really talking in tangible ways about the way that you share power or the way that people you work with are involved in decision-making, creating programs, and how that experience of them being in, if they are in, and when they are in shared decision-making or leadership and are helping to direct the work, how you've noticed that impacting them and how that might, things you might notice that are different from places where there's more of like a top-down solution of just telling people to do something. Anthony, since you already started on this a little, I'm going to pass it over to you, but could you talk a little more about the way that Sumiya Collective has organized really in this decentralized way and really cultivated this shared leadership structure and how that has affected some of the people involved?
Yeah, thank you. So we really wanted to center specifically on organizing and not, providing services, not just like providing help, because I think often folks in the community are used to, like receiving a service instead of like being in solidarity with one another. And that at first was a challenge because it takes time and work to not enable systems of hierarchies. And so by doing that, we started by just having conversations with folks about like the difference between, being in solidarity, being part of a mutual aid project and like receiving a service. And then from there, we talk about like, all right, what are the needs in our community? Like, what are your needs? What are the needs of your friends, your neighbors? And like, what are actionable steps that we can take to like break down those barriers? And with that, it started with just like folks joining our collective meetings. We meet every like Monday, we would meet through Zoom. But even through that, like we saw the challenges of folks, not having access to internet, not having like stable internet connections, not really being literate in computers. So we had to really like start through the basics of like how to navigate these systems of communication so we can actually get the work done, right? And then as we developed those skills, as we developed those understandings, we also let the folks who were able to develop the skills start to lead the conversation, start to like draft agendas, like set the goals for like our projects and start to really train other folks. And then that kind of just built the system of like building leadership amongst the folks who we were supporting. And so we have like really dope members like Ellie, Jenny, Mariela, who have been leading the food call team. They were leading like hundreds of people in making calls and doing trainings, setting up webinars, and that was just so beautiful to see. And now they're also leading independent projects, and specifically they're part of the CitySeed collab trainings where they're like thinking about how can we also start like a food business ran by the community, and thinking about like what are our values that want to go into that. And so and I guess to answer the question, it's just like we are really mindful about like taking the time to build the necessary skills that folks need and provide the support, while being mindful of how much space we are taking up as like folks that may be well-versed in certain areas of, like facilitating, organizing, and knowing when to step back. I think that's the most important thing as an organization, like let folks grow and then like just be there for support, and then know that like there is no hierarchy. We are all horizontal, we are all the same, we're all different folks, and we all have different abilities and skills to contribute, and that is how we try to run our projects. And the way that we continue growing is really a testament to the way that we've been able to develop leadership, and then the folks who become leaders are developing the leaderships of others.
Yeah, thank you. I so appreciate you talking about the time that it takes. And I have really witnessed in the process of being involved in Sumiya Collective, but very intentionally being kind of in the background and supporting, and have appreciated so much. There's like this constant reminder in the way the work is done to not have anyone who seems to be in leadership make a decision without actually coming to the whole group and leaving that time for like decision making and shared ownership and shared leadership. And that really does have to be an intentional thing, not just once, but like all the time over and over. And so you just really articulated that so well. And I think that's an important thing when people are trying to do community-directed work. It's not just going out and asking one time or doing a survey, but it's really like this constant involvement and constantly cultivating leadership from within, like really having that intention as core to the work. And so I've really witnessed that, seeing that from the background at Sumiya. So thank you for sharing. I guess I'll leave it open. Each of you have something to share. Dishuan or Kimberly or Sumiya, do you want to jump in and speak about how you're doing community-directed work?
Hi. With Incubates and Sanctuary Kitchen, all of the programming we really has developed based on the communities we serve. So the needs that have been brought to our attention through constant evaluations and speaking to the communities directly and asking them, what can we do to support you in your goals that you're trying to reach. So, with the Food Business Accelerator, we do target the communities that face those barriers to entry in starting a food business, and prioritizing them in terms of their applications and in their participation. We really focus on where the entrepreneurs are at, and supporting them through their processes and connecting them to the resources that they need to start their business. For Sanctuary Kitchen, we have a couple different levels of community involvement. The biggest thing, regardless, is removing the language barriers. So most of the all the refugees we work with, and some of the immigrants, like English is not their first language. So really making sure that communication is clear, and having interpreters and translations and everything, whether it's conversations to material that we're sharing. Sanctuary Kitchen, was started with a leadership team of community members who were really invested in starting this program. And so they were individuals who were involved with CitySeed, with Iris and other partners. They were volunteers, and that has since grown to include the chefs that we work with. And this year, actually, we are looking at a community advisory board model so that the communities that we serve and we work with are more included. And so it's the immigrant and refugee communities, it's the customers that we serve, and as well as other partners in the community. So that's happening like right now, looking into developing that and changing that model. And then, the chefs are, that we work with in terms of our programs are constantly the programs are being evaluated to assess needs, to make modifications. evaluating progress. You know, this is a Sanctuary Kitchen is a chef-centered model. So it's the chef's stories, their model, their recipes, their needs are being addressed constantly in whatever we do. So whether it's providing them the training that they're seeking to move up in leadership, making sure that they have their their recipe, they're clearly the owners of their recipes, that it's not a Sanctuary Kitchen dish, it's Abir's, you know, makluba, it's Huma's naan. So, you know, we don't want to homogenize their food at all, and making it, you know, and usually it's what happens to cultural foods in America. And then lastly, you know, providing the entrepreneurship support that the chefs want in order to, you know, go off on their own.
Sumiya, are the chefs involved in decision making beyond kind of the recipes and menus, but are they involved in other parts of the decision making about how Sanctuary Kitchen runs?
Absolutely. So when we are talking about the culinary training and the professional development that we're integrating into the social enterprise, those training modules are developed based on what the chefs have asked for. So they said, we want to learn how to do this. We want to learn, can you help me, you know, start this? It's a constant like back and forth. It's a very student-led education, I would, if you want to call it that way. And then as far as, you know, our culinary events, the same process. We work with the chefs so that they're the ones leading it and we're supporting them. So in terms of what event they want to participate in, how they want to do it, the recipes involved, the discussions that are involved, all of it is chef-led.
Great, thank you. Dishuan, did you want to jump in and then we'll pass it to Kimberly?
Sure thing. So I feel like community involvement is at the center of the work that I do. Technically speaking, Group Life is a single member LLC, so all the work that gets done is literally from like volunteer ends. And I feel like I'm of a things going on. So for instance, the community gardens that I work at, of course, I come with a certain skill set and knowledge of particularly like agriculture. And the people there, like, you know, they may come at first and it's like, hey, whatever you say, let's do it. But I always encourage them through conversation, through getting to know them better, through the non-agricultural work that we end up doing or end up experiencing together. I always like pay attention and get insight to their interests and their passions. And then I just learned how to include those different things and tie them into agriculture. Working with youth most of my life has like helped me develop that skill set. So, for instance, like now the Armory Community Garden can pretty much run itself. They appreciate the things that I have to offer that are like non-standard. But yes, I don't know if I should answer the question. I kind of missed that question that just popped up on the screen. But
That's okay. You can keep sharing about your work first. That's fine.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. So
why don't you move a little closer to your computer? We can hear you better if you're a little closer.
Is this better? Okay, cool. So yes, so the Armory Garden and community gardens in general, that work is usually horizontal. I just again offer skill sets as far as like, hey, this might not be the best, like naturally speaking, for something to grow or something like that. But if you do want this particular structure, or you do want this particular way of distributing the food, or this, that, and the third, from my experiences, this is what I've learned. And this is like, you know, just some advice on how we can make it work. Even with the youth program that I do youth program in a lot of capacities, whether it's in school, those are usually like alternative classes for children who may not be able to sit still in the class all day. And so immediately I'm getting to know them and see what their interests are, because once I like laid down like what I'm capable of showing them, it's just like from there it's like whatever they want to see, we'll structure the curriculum around that. Also, because I am in agriculture, it's not as prevalent yet as it will be in New Haven. A lot of the people that I work with and partner with don't really know like what to expect from agricultural programs. So I've been blessed to have the freedom to be able to keep it like horizontal as far as like input from all the participants. And so even at ConnCat, the youth learning, it started as like a traditional growing agricultural program with garden beds and things, but it turned into like them learning how to cook culturally relevant dishes. And then learning about different food justice issues and just reprogramming of certain things that we grew up on, like food guide pyramids and things like that. And this was all like based on the interests of them. We had conversations about corner store culture, like something very specific to New Haven. And it takes off. So there's a lot of different ways that the community is involved with the work that I do. Some that I haven't
Dishuan,
mentioned.
could you speak a little bit more, like as a Black urban farmer and forager and permaculturist, how can you talk a little bit about sort of your ways of working and also the type of work, like what you're growing? And you just mentioned like culturally relevant foods, but also the way that you're working that you think is important in terms of kind of working within the Black community and part of the Black community that might be different than like white-centered urban agriculture spaces.
Thank you for bringing up that. I like to re-emphasize that I was born and raised in the communities that I serve, which I feel like is very important because language barriers go beyond just traditional languages that we acknowledge, but also like, like for instance, I can teach a U program and give straight facts and what we would call slang, and there would be learning going on the whole time. And it would be like better received by the youth because they just understand these things. Also, I am one of the youth. I was 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they really understand that. I can come in a way that feels like family. And particularly speaking, like we come from cultures that where family is a big thing. And having like feeling like family is there is a very big thing, especially in underserved communities where the family structure has been systematically broken. So showing up in that way, it just gives me, it allows me to resonate a certain type of energy that kids pick up on, and that adults pick up on, everyone picks up on, and it doesn't feel like necessarily like I'm like coming from a dictator or in charge type standpoint, but rather just like somebody that they can talk to that just actually knows, they can understand like what they want. So when we grow culturally relevant dishes or culturally relevant foods and cook culturally relevant dishes with the youth, it's almost like I'm babysitting my little cousins or something like that. Because and it feels like that, and that in itself makes it easier to reach them beyond just agriculture, but just in life values, because now they see that these things, I'm not like inherently different. I just chose agriculture as a profession, and they could too. And so even with teaching them and training them on like different avenues on how to like take food and agriculture and run with it, it's different than what you would learn in a traditional agriculture program, say at a university. Even if I went to HBCU and did an agriculture program there, it's just like, hey, you can do microgreens. I documented a series of like me teaching youth, random youth, how to like start a microgreen business, like the basics of it. Indeed, we didn't get too deep into the law because we were like relatively young, but just how to like set it up and grow, and like something that you can do in the corner of a space in a room that you may be staying in, with relatively low inputs as far as like infrastructure, equipment. So immediately they were making money, and it's amazing because like I just let them do whatever they want to do with their money. I feel like it's more of an incentive versus like a top down approach usually, because I had to go to bat for them, where it's like, hey, do a pizza party for everybody and keep it like that. And I'm just like, no, let them like make money and be excited about making more money so they can do whatever they want with their money.
Yeah.
Indeed. So like
Great.
little things
Thank you
like
so
that.
much.
Indeed,
Yeah,
yes.
that's like, those are great examples. Thank you. I know we're creeping up on our time, so I want to pass it over to Kimberly and then give you all a chance to answer one more question. So
Okay,
go ahead,
cool.
Kimberly.
Yeah, so I would just say that, you know, first to start, our mission is to help support and manifest community-led efforts. So centering community is really important to us. But the urban agriculture master planning process really gives us the opportunity to focus on like shifting power. And for us, I think it comes from a place of having to first redistribute power. So that's why we're explicitly committed to working directly with community members that aren't connected to or currently active in our mainstream food system, local food system, and other related spaces, as opposed to working with organizations or individuals that already tend to have that access. And our priority is reducing barriers to participation for all residents, especially, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, vulnerable and disinvested communities. I would say the process is like really rooted in shifting power and resources, especially through the Community Advisory Board, because they'll be co-leading this project alongside FSPD. In terms of shifting resources, you know, CAB members will be paid for their time, $25 an hour specifically. So, you know, fair compensation for what they'll bring to the room in the space. And then outside of the CAB, we also will have monthly meetings with the wider community to ensure that they're also able to guide this process and vision for urban agricultural development in New Haven. And, you know, I'd like to add that we're really committed to truly diverse representation in this process. So the CAB will consist of, as I mentioned earlier, 4 different subgroups with different areas of expertise: neighborhood, community health, youth, and urban farming experts, so that people with different experiences and knowledge can see a space for them in this process, even if, you know, they're newer to urban agriculture and thinking about it in that systemic way. In addition, the application for CAB members will be available in multiple languages, such as Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, and translation services will be available as needed if we do have people from those communities participating in the process, which we hope we will. So just to emphasize, the Urban Agriculture Master Plan and everything that comes out of it during this 3-year process will be a direct manifestation of what community members believe are the priorities and solutions to reducing barriers to entry and sustainability in urban agriculture. And most importantly, we want this to be the start to building authentic relationships with residents so we can continue to share and shift power in the long term as the FSPD's work grows.
Can we just like take a breath and let that like sink in for a minute? Like, this is a city department that is paying people what should be an actual living wage, right? $25 an hour, valuing the wisdom that exists across so many communities who are not actually usually even asked to come to the table, no less given the power to make decisions. I just want to commend that this is happening and just emphasize to people, like, you know, there are so many ways power happens from the grassroots up. And when people who have power because they're at the city or in an organization or a business actually use that position of power to then shift the power to the people in community and take direction from in really meaningful, not tokenizing ways, is a way to have a much larger impact on a system. And so I just want to, I'm just like repeating what you just said, just to emphasize how important this is. As you know, I'm glad you just explained some of the details about that. Is there more that you want to share about, you know, any part of that, of this work?
Yeah, I would just say that it's, you know, we've allocated a budget for up to 60 members. So it really allows us to create a bigger community advisory board to increase, you know, diverse representation. And yeah, we're just very excited that also this project is rooted in equity, community ownership, and anti-displacement and gentrification. And I think the key part of that, to, you know, preventing anti-gentrification and displacement, is community ownership and developing that and creating opportunities for the community to have ownership over urban agriculture as it grows in New Haven. So that's what we're just really hoping. As I said, you know, we're looking at this as to the start to our work of, you know, really working very, very closely with the community. You know, our director Latha has already developed a lot of good relationships with grassroots orgs, but we're just seeing this as an opportunity to develop more direct relationships with community members and foster more community ownership over our local food system.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, when we think about resiliency in the food system, why you're choosing to focus on urban agriculture as an element of, as a key part of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I would say, I think that when talking about BIPOC and disinvested communities and resiliency, I would say that those communities are innately resilient because they've had no other option, right? So urban agriculture in New Haven, there's so many residents that are BIPOC or from disinvested communities that grow food, even with limited space. I grew up I maybe forgot to mention this, I grew up in Fairhaven, born and raised in Fairhaven for the most part. So, which is a neighborhood in New Haven for those who aren't familiar. And it is considered a disinvested community. But that's all to say that I grew up with neighbors and family members who kept chickens before the ordinance was even created and passed, right? Like I used to wake up to chickens in my backyard or roosters in my backyard, not sure where they came from. And I've just seen, in my personal and professional experience, so much resiliency in our local food system and so much knowledge from community members who aren't, active in crafting, food system policy and urban agriculture vision, despite having so much experience and knowledge. So, I think supporting resiliency in urban agriculture and our local food system is first highlighting, valuing, and uplifting that resiliency that already exists in that history of urban agriculture in these very communities that we're prioritizing. We want the grandpa who's been gardening forever, and the aunt who composts inside her home and shares it with her friends and family, the teenager who grows flowers, and just all these community members and more, so that we can create a resilient urban agriculture community, which I think is the only way to create that and really make it resilient is to create that sense of community ownership, so that those communities are able to benefit first and foremost from the environmental, socioeconomic, and health benefits of urban agriculture.
Great, thank you. There was a question in the Q&A for you. First of all, is your presentation available anywhere? Are those slides available anywhere?
No, they're not, but I'd like to check in first with maybe Latha about whether we'd like to share them. Okay. But this presentation is going, from what I understand, this presentation and panel will be on the
yes.
Symposium website, so it can always be viewed there.
Great. And the other question was, and if you want, I can answer this, but happy for you to, there was a question, is there a food policy council in New Haven, and does your office work with them?
Yeah, so I would preface that with saying that there was or is still a New Haven Food Policy Council, but it is taking a break right now, so it's not functioning. But prior to that, the FSPD worked very closely with the Food Policy Council. There were really strong relationships built there, but they are in a break right now, so.
Yeah. And I'll share that I was on the Food Policy Council for 8 years and helped to head it. And it was the Food Policy Council that actually worked for 4 years to create the position of Food System Policy Director, and which now Latha has been able to turn into the division of food policy, the Food Policy Division, System Division for the city. So the council has previously been very active and hope it will become more active again. Do any of you want to share, I guess there's 2 main questions, and I'll let you sort of jump on which one you want to touch on, either about ways that you're trying to address systemic changes. Maybe we'll focus on that for a second. Just a lot of the things that you're dealing with have to do with systemic issues of poverty, of marginalization of communities, of consolidation of money and power in certain areas. And those are systemic things, right? And so I'm curious about ways, if you haven't, additional things that from what you've already mentioned, that you might be trying to work on changing those systemic things to have a positive impact on the communities that you're working with. And feel free to jump in, whoever wants to touch on that.
I can jump in. So our communities face so many different types of barriers, whether it be poverty, racial inequality, a broken immigration system, and they all contribute to the various challenges that we've seen people deal with, and specifically thinking about healthcare and being in a global pandemic right now and seeing how many undocumented and people of color are just being left behind and disproportionately being impacted. We are also organizing folks who have been part of like the Cajitas project, the mutual aid fundraisers, to also fight to create like a more concrete change in our society. And so we have been organizing in support of expanding access to Husky Medicaid for all people, regardless of immigration status, because we know that there are many families that, and thinking about resiliency, like so many families that have had gotten COVID, have lost their jobs, are struggling financially, and are still like doing what they can to support one another, and you know, doing what they can to just survive in this like awful moment that we're living in. But we're also realizing that like, okay, like there is a way for folks to not have to live this way. There is there are various things that could change to make it so people don't have to be chronically ill or become disabled because they weren't able to seek the medical care that they needed when they got hurt from a job, or they were let go and then they weren't able to follow, you know, any like legal routes to hold their employers accountable because of their status or due to a lack of financial resource. So what we're doing is also integrating folks who are part of our projects to also fight and use their voices to fight to create broader access to the systems that can basically create healthier communities. So that is one way that we're you know, working, and there are various other ways. And what's beautiful about the collective is that whenever like folks in the collective bring up an idea or an initiative, like we allow space and really create like the foster just the sensibility for folks to go with the initiative that they want, and we just all come together to try to support the projects that we're working on. And so with that, we, you know, hope to really dismantle a lot of the systems that continue to harm us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really helpful. Anybody else want to share about that?
I say for like there's a lot of focus on like training people at a base level to subsidize the food that they actually eat, which does a few things actually. It helps from a monetary standpoint of maybe not having enough for food. It also allows for the opportunity to take it to the next level through entrepreneurship. And I feel like that's like very important. And then there's also like partnerships that are going on as far as and also emphasizing like healthy lifestyle and healthy living. So not just like growing food, but also like these things will help as like preventative medicine that will address a lot of the issues that come from like health. And then there's also like the partnerships going on. So like some of my youth actually that have run through the programs, like for instance, one of my youth started the Sojourn Market, which is a market that is focused on education and also like just bringing locally grown, like literally locally grown, like out of backyard type food into the neighborhood. Another has started the Green Box Pantry. And these are all like super grassroots versions of like what CitySeed does or what Sumiya Collective does. Smaller versions, like micro versions. But they work from neighborhood to neighborhood. So like seeing these things start and scale up to provide like food access and education and a place for people to meet for mental health purposes, like all these things address some of the issues that we are dealing with. There are many, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
For entrepreneurs, it's not easy to get started, and there's a lot of bureaucracy in getting all of those licensings in place and all the forms and all the departments that you have to talk to. And I know the city is working hard to streamline the process and make it more accessible, but there's still a long way to go. And this is something that I see daily when I'm working with entrepreneurs and getting to help them get started. And, you know, New Haven passed the micro food business law now, what, 2 years now? Huge difference, because before that, you know, whether you were starting small, like, you know, catering business, or whether you had a huge restaurant, you were being treated the same in terms of the fees that were required and so forth. So that has since been modified, which has been a huge, huge step. But like I said, there's just for, you know, a lot of hoops that entrepreneurs need to go to. And then if you don't speak the language, if you're not familiar with the system, it's even more difficult. So that's a huge challenge. And then, you know, for the refugee and immigrant chefs that we work with, you know, they're navigating new systems completely, and not knowing the language. So taxes, employment, immigration, healthcare, everything, you know, that we kind of take for granted, you know, growing up here. And, you know, most of the chefs that we work with are women, and most of them are parents. And so childcare is definitely another barrier to entry into the workforce. And so with Things for Your Kitchen, you know, we've been trying to work in developing environments where, whether it's like hiring a babysitter or, you know, we're exploring ways, and we constantly are facing challenges on how to support the chefs we work with in that area. And then lastly, the biggest thing that it really breaks my heart is that, you know, so many times we find that the chefs have to choose between earning government benefits and working. And that's just a huge problem. You know, we really focus on providing a livable wage, fair compensation for events that the chefs participate in. And it has come up so many times where the chefs have declined work because they're worried that their benefits are going to be revoked. And so, and it's not like they're working part-time at most. So it's not like they're, you know, living the dream and are, you know, cheating the system. So it's just, and that's been a huge challenge. And, you know, I don't have the answer for that either, but it's just not right, you know.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. Yeah, that is a huge thing. And so many people who are not experiencing that themselves don't realize that, like, you can start making a very small amount of money and lose so many of your benefits. And so, like, the impact of that on your life is, like, the system is really not set up in a way to support people having what they need to live and get employment and income. It really creates barriers. The system itself creates barriers to that happening. I'm really glad that you brought that up. And the piece around entrepreneurship, right? Like, if people come from a family with money or a family with experience in starting a business in this country, they already have like 6 steps up, 10 steps up on top of if they're a white male or person with access to money and other kinds of support. So, you know, those kind of supports that you're trying to bring are a part of building those systems. And I want to just like emphasize that both Anthony and Dishuan, you both talked about some different models of addressing systems. So Anthony talked about kind of an organizing model of using organizing to make system change. And Dishuan, you talked about partnership models. So sometimes when you don't have an organization that is structured around kind of grassroots organizing for policy change or for other kinds of social justice change, that partnering with people who are doing that, I know it's a little different than the partnerships you were talking about, but just as another way to do that is partnering and joining in to coalitions that are doing that work. Kimberly, did you want to talk about this a little bit, about system change elements?
Yeah, sure. I would add that I think Sumiya already touched on this in a couple of the other panelists, but I would say one systemic barrier that we identified that is a central part of this master plan is access to information and the lack of clear and easy to navigate city processes, right? So for urban agriculture specifically, we want a major goal is to make city processes more clear and easy to navigate. And that includes like zoning regulations, that includes more equity oriented policies, you know, knowing the processes for acquiring land, which is something that's already being worked on in partnership with a Yale intern and the division, developing a vacant lot toolkit, right? But our goal is to go beyond that and improve it so it is easier for individual community members to get access to land, city-owned land for growing food or urban agricultural businesses. So that's a key part of this. And in line with that goal of increasing access to information, aside from making city processes easier, we plan on releasing multilingual and multi-format toolkits. So, multilingual, we're going to do multiple languages, but the multi-format piece is important for us because we also want to make the information available in audio format or video format for people, so it's easier for people to access it, in keeping in mind different literacy levels and just like busyness, right? Some people might not have time to go through a toolkit. And these toolkits will be very much informed by the CAB and at the community-wide meetings to make sure that they actually are achieving their goal of being easy to comprehend. And that goes the same for the city processes, right? We'll be checking in consistently with the community, like, is this an easier thing to navigate? And I think a key piece of increasing access to information is developing a very robust distribution strategy. So going beyond organizations and, I think hopefully by the end of this 3-year process, we'll be able to do canvassing and outreach, right? So to be able to directly like put these materials in the hands of people and put it in multiple spaces like libraries that people frequent and other community spaces. So really just making sure that we're getting resources directly into the hands of residents. And then, I think something I just want to emphasize is it's important to just ask community members, like, what are the systemic barriers? And that's something that we want to do, right? Like, and be able to meet people where they're at. And that's throughout the process. We'll be checking in consistently with the community. Like, is this working? What can we do better? And I think part of that is, so to that end, we've tried to predict some of the barriers that might show up, right? Which some of them I already mentioned. We live in a very diverse city. However, resources and like meetings and processes tend to be in just English. And not accessible to people who speak other languages. So that's why we're very explicitly developing multilingual resources and paying for translation. Like Sumiya mentioned, childcare, that was something that we put into the budget before COVID to make sure that we're accounting for the people who have children so that they can also participate. As I mentioned earlier, in alignment with our focus on equity, we're paying people fair wage for their time. I think something else I want to just emphasize is throughout the process, we're making it very clear that significant or formal experience with urban agriculture or food systems isn't a requirement for participation. So if someone's just interested in becoming more involved and has thoughts and ideas and questions, like, this space is also for them. It's not just for people who are, it's for people who are also newer to the work and just interested. And I think finally, I'd just say that I think I've touched on this a couple of times, that we're just interested in creating like intersectional systemic solutions that address injustice. And I think when you make that clear to community members, like, oh, we're trying to fix the systemic issues, the root causes of inequity, then that helps a lot, right, with reducing some of those barriers. And that's why we created 3 thematic pathways, socioeconomic viability, mobilizing resources for workforce development and training. So there's and creating an equitable and enabling policy environment. So there's a clear path line and pathway and different like pipelines, basically, I meant to say, to urban agriculture, along the entire chain. So I think those are, just the focuses for this whole process.
That's great. Thank you. We just have a couple minutes left, and I will share that there is going to be a separate Q&A after this for 15 minutes if people want to join that, where we can address a couple other questions. But if anyone wants to speak on, you just mentioned intersectional systemic change, but there's been some questions around kind of, you all represent certain pieces of the food system, but the food system is huge, right? In terms of like producers and distributors and where food waste goes and all these other elements of it. Does anyone want to speak for a moment to just kind of maybe how you see there could be some partnerships or resiliency around working on any of those other pieces of the food system? Or maybe that's too big a question for our 1 minute left, and we'll move that. Maybe we'll move that into the next section. Since we have 1 minute left. I guess we should just close this out, actually, since we have 1 minute. I just want to thank all of you so much for sharing about your work. And I hope that you have given people a little taste, that, a little sweetness of the honey, and then they can go on and learn more and get involved. But I think you've each articulated some super important pieces of how to do community-driven work and why it's important, and how to impact system change, and not just, in addition to the importance of meeting the needs of people immediately where they are. So thank you all so much for your time. You can unmute.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great,
Indeed.
great discussions.
Yeah, so we're gonna, there'll be a link put in the chat and we can go into a separate, I think more of a Zoom format so we can see each other and answer a couple other questions. I will say that I will make sure, I think this will go up on a Yale site, but I'll also put this up. I have a podcast called The Table Underground, and I will sometime soon put the video up as well as links to all of these organizations so that it lives somewhere forever and ever. But I think I'm sure it will go up on the Yale site somewhere as well, so that people can find y'all. Thank you all so much. Many blessings.
Thank you. You too.
I'm gonna switch over now.
Okay.